Hello, and welcome to today's presentation on how to read iReady growth reports. Today we will cover finding data, understanding the data, sharing this with students and families, and our next steps. To find your growth data, there are two sections you'll want to look at: class data and student data. We'll start with class data. For class data, you'll go to iReady, log in, and in the menu up top, you'll click Reports, and you'll make sure that Diagnostic is selected, and then you'll choose Diagnostic Growth, and then you can pick the subject, reading or math. On this new screen, you'll see the different overview of how your students performed as a class. The first thing you'll want to set is your comparison diagnostic and your placement definition. Comparison diagnostic, you'll want to be most recent. Your placement definition will need a little more explanation. Placement definition defines how students are classified. One looking at their placement distribution with the yellow, green, and red. With a beginning of the year or end of the year, it will shift their standards to be at those times. So at the beginning of the year, it would expect that a student would be early on grade. At the end of the year, it would expect a student that would be mid or above level. The standard looks at which diagnostic they're taking, whether it's fall, winter, or spring, and determines which placement to put in based on that. And so in almost every report, you'll want to make sure you're on standard. To help visualize this, we can imagine a student, Michael, who has their second diagnostic score of 470. On a beginning of the year score, that would be early, and they would show up green. For a standard, even though it's the middle of the year, he's very close to being on mid or late learning in his learning path. So it would still show up green. However, if you had end of the year selected, because it still places him at early and it assumes that it's the end of the school year, it would mark him as yellow. This would make you assume that he is behind level if his score is too low, or it might make you assume that they're above level if the score is too high. So just remember, always keep it on standard. With the current placement distribution, what this is showing you is it helps you look at the current placement based off of their previous diagnostic. And so if we dive a little deeper into the numbers, we'll see here that 12 students from this class are 2 or more grade levels below, while 9 students, or 39%, are 1 grade level below, and 2 students, or 9%, are on or above grade level. The important part to look here is the from percentage. What this is telling us is that in the first time the students took the diagnostic as a class, 70% of them were 2 or more grade levels below. Now, after taking the winter diagnostic, that's only 52%, which means the other almost 20% of students were shifted up into one of the higher 2 placements. Then if we look at our 1 grade level or below, we'll see that number has increased from 30% up to 39%. This is actually a good thing. This is because we've pushed more students up from 2 or more grade levels below into 1 grade level below. And then we'll see once again that's for on or above grade level, that's gone from 0% to 9%. And again, that's because we've taken students who were 1 grade level below, or potentially 2 or more grade levels below, and have elevated them to on or above grade level. So this is actually showing great growth for the class. The next area you would look at is progress to annual typical growth. The thing you want to remember here is that when the students took the diagnostic in the fall, The growth target that was assigned to them was the end of the year growth target. So as we look at the progress to annual growth for this class, we'll see 39% of the median are on the path to their typical growth goal. In a normal school year, we'd want to see this closer to the 50% or above range. Uh, that's explained down here. Most classes should expect to see at least 50% median progress. This means they're exactly on path. If a student was expected to see a 30-point growth from fall to spring, if they hit 50th%, that means they're at 15-point growth. And so between winter and spring, they would just be expected to see another 15 points. The last measurement on this page that you would focus on is your actual student growth. So while the top showed us our class as a summary, the bottom helps us look at individual student progress. And so here we have 5 students and their different percent progress, both for annual typical growth and annual stretch growth. And as a reminder, the difference between the two is the annual typical growth is what, let's say, student 1 would be expected to see based off of what every other student in the country who's tested similarly to student 1, the progress they've seen. While the annual stretch growth takes the highest percentage of those students and how many of them have seen exponential growth. This number is what you would see if you had a student who was maybe 2 grade levels below. This is the number they would need to reach in order to get on grade level within a year, which is not expected. What is expected is between 1 to 3 years, a student would reach their annual stretch growth. And within any single year, their annual typical growth is what we would be looking for. And so here we see student 1 has not only met their annual typical growth, they've exceeded it by 13%. So this student right now would be working on their annual stretch growth goal, which they're already halfway to. While student 5 is right on track to reach their annual typical growth. They're at 54%, which means 15 out of 28. 28 would be the actual target they were expected to hit. They've seen 15% growth or 15 points growth. The last 2 columns show you their initial placement scale and their current placement scale. And this is for all domains within a subject. So you would see student 5 was at grade 1, and they're currently still at grade 1. While student 1 initially tested at grade 2, now they're testing in a grade 3 range. And so when students are assigned their individual learning paths, those will be readjusted to meet their newest placement and scale scores. Next is the student growth details. And to find this, the easiest way is once you're in your growth report, just click on any student's name and it will bring you right to the individual student growth target. Again, this screen is broken down into 3 sections. The first one we'll look at is the overall growth for the individual student. So again, as we look at their year-to-date growth, we'll want to look at their scale point percentage, where they are, and we would expect them to be at the 50 percentile during a typical school year. Keeping in mind that 2020-2021 school year was not a typical school year, and so it would not be surprising to find many students below the 50% mark. And then we also have our progress to annual stretch goal for this student. And again, this will always lag behind their annual typical growth because it's a much higher number to reach. Their regular growth is 28 points for this student. For this student to have stretch growth, they would need to see 62 points. The second area we'll look at is overall diagnostic growth. Um, and this helps us see the growth they've seen from diagnostic to diagnostic. So the first area you can look at is up top, and this just is a key to let you know the scale score range a student that's on grade level should be in. So for this student, for mid on grade level, you would expect them to have a 579, and you would expect them to be anywhere between a 557 and a 629 for iReady scores. So down here, we're looking at what the student scored when they first took the diagnostic in the fall. Then we see the most recent diagnostic, what they took in January, and we see any growth or declines here. And so this student saw a 15-point growth. This is where their typical score would be. And so they're coming closer to their typical score. And in the spring, we'd like to see them at or above this line here. The last area here is placement by domain. And this looks at each individual domain within reading and math and what placement the student scores in that area. So for this student, we're looking at their reading, and we see overall, they've gone up one grade level from grade 2 to grade 3. In phonological awareness, they had tested out in the fall, and they again tested out in the winter. For phonics, we've seen some decline. And so we'd want to look a little bit deeper in to see what area or what reasonings we can find for this. Maybe it was just a bad day for them to take the diagnostic. High frequency words, we see they've already tested out of. And then you have some gains noted by the green arrow here. So for vocabulary and comprehension literature, we see they went from one grade level and advanced to a second grade level. Now, as we were working on our slows, these are the areas where you determined between reading and math where you'd like to see the growth. So after looking at their first diagnostic and second diagnostic, you'll want to talk to your administrator to see if you are on track or if maybe you should reevaluate. Perhaps you picked an area like comprehension and informational text, but maybe reviewing the data, we find we should have been really focusing on vocabulary. In this case, it looks like this was not the area you'd need to look at. During your normal teaching, the students have seen the growth that you were looking for. Once you have all the diagnostic information and their growth information, you'll want to share the students' progress with the students and their families. To do this, again, you would go to your menu, you would click on reports. You'll need to be in the student section, and you'll want to make sure your for families is selected. And then you would pick reading or math. With this, you'll get a report that looks very similar to the individual student report we just looked at, with just a couple differences. One difference is within this report, not only does it give you their scale score growth, but it also points out their national norm. So we can see where the student was in the fall at the 57th percentile, and we can see now in the winter the student has risen to the 60th percentile. Additionally, if you look over in the domains box, you can look at each individual domain and help explain to the student and parents the growth that the student has seen from one to the other, and what strength areas they can continue to work on, and what areas of improvement that might be able to help between the winter score and when they take it again in the spring. Once you've looked at all the diagnostic data and analyzed it somewhat, there's going to be some next steps. Here are 6 ones that we recommend. This is a minimum, not a maximum. You can feel free to adjust these as needed. The first thing, though, that you need to look at is their individual learning paths. Students should be spending at least 50 minutes each week on their reading and math learning path independently. So 50 minutes for reading and 50 minutes for the math learning. This is for their individual learning paths that were assigned by iReady. Additionally, you can group students. You can use the instructional groupings report to find focus areas for teacher-led instruction. You should meet with your teaching team. You should have regular meetings and discussions with your teaching team to determine aligned teaching strategies. This would include other grade level teachers for some of the upper grades, like middle school. This would include any EL staff, special ed staff, title specialist. So everybody's on the same team, and you are the captain of that team. So you should be setting the direction and helping them determine how they can best support you in elevating student achievement. The next thing is adjusting learning paths. From time to time, you might find that a student has under or overperformed, and you're able to go in and adjust the student's learning path as needed. So if it's repeatedly giving them work that's above their actual success level, we can adjust that to bring them back down to where the student is at. And same thing if the work isn't challenging enough. And as part of working on their learning paths, we want to make sure we're really tracking the student progress. This is the most important part if we're going to have students working in iReady. That will help you see and identify areas that students might be struggling with between diagnostics. By them working at least 50 minutes a week on their iReady path, and by you following their progress to make sure they're not struggling in areas, it will give them the best support along with their normal learning to help them achieve their typical learning goals that we're looking for in the spring. And then lastly, we want to make sure we emphasize growth over just the score. So while we want to review a student's score, we want to make sure we emphasize the importance of them working on the learning paths and understanding what's happening. We don't want to spend too much time having them just focus on numbers. If you need more help with this, you can always contact me, Nate Talbot, at my email address. I'm always happy to set up individual times to go over iReady accounts and reports with you as an individual or as a group. You can find the iReady data analysis guide at this link, which breaks down more about the class reports, the student reports, and some of the group reports you can pull. And then there's iReady Central. If you log into your iReady account and go to the Help menu up top and click iReady Central, find resources, there's a slew of videos, PDF files, and presentations about every topic involved with iReady. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to working with you on this more in the future.